Nick's wandering out to handle a professional responsibility that he's to take care of. And then, so you will know after the Lord's Supper, I'm going to be slipping out, and he will finish up worship as I'm heading toward Louisville. My son, who many of you would say is not in his right mind, is doing the Louisville Ironman this morning. He already has been in the Ohio River and swam 2.4 miles. He's right now in the midst of a 114-mile bike ride, and will complete that with a 26.2-mile run, or totally 140-mile.
You're right, he's nuts.
My wife and oldest daughter are already down there cheering him on, and I'm going to join him. I'm preaching from the Job scripture this morning, and unfortunately we don't have slides. There's a couple of really hilarious slides, and you'll have to trust me on that, so you can laugh now if you want to. Earlier this year, there was an English comedian and actor, his name is Stephen Fry, who was interviewed by an Irish broadcaster, Guy Byrne. At one point, Byrne said to Fry, "Suppose that is all true, and you walk up to the pearly gates and are confronted by God. What will Stephen Fry say?" Well, Fry responded, "Bone cancer in children? What's that all about? How dare you create a world where there is such misery that's not our fault?" He then added a second question: "Why should I respect a God who creates a world that's so full of injustice and pain?" That segment of the interview was soon posted on YouTube, as you can imagine, and within days there were over 5 million clicks that had been viewing that. Not surprisingly, the response to the clip ranged every place from adoration to anger, as most YouTube clicks do. The head of the Ireland's Presbyterian Church branded Fry as spiritually blind, and later Fry apologized for any offense he might have caused, because he said, "I'm not referring to any specific religion." He said, "I am just saying what deep theological thinkers have said and questioned over the centuries." Now, you might have your own opinion about Stephen Fry, but he did sync with what many people do as they ask a question of God about things that we mortals don't like, or what us theologians call the question of the existence of good and evil. Absolutely true what Nick was saying during the prayer is that most of us have similar thoughts. Just kind of imagine yourself now if you're transported to heaven for an hour to talk face to face with God, with the assurance that one question that you ask God would be answered. What question would you ask? Perhaps you'd want to toss around some of these questions that I put together. Why am I suffering with pancreatic cancer? Why are some people capable of child abuse? Why can't we have the wisdom when we're young so it really benefits us? Why are there earthquakes in Nepal? Why the evil and brutality of ISIS? Why is there an unending conflict in the Middle East? Why do you allow Boko Haram to kill hundreds of innocent women and children? Why the Holocaust, the Rwandan genocide, or the Khmer Rouge slaughter of millions? Why have you allowed so many mass shootings at schools in America? I mean, there's almost no limit to the questions we'd ask God. And not just out of idle curiosity. Many of us suffer and have pain and wrestle with the experience of human pain and grief, which is common to us, whether it's illness, divorce, anger, or death. We're invested in the questions that we would ask God, and we think that God's answer might help us with those things that we cannot avoid dealing with. Now, if you watch Fry's video clip, you may be struck, as I was, by the passion in which he asked those questions. You might want to look it up, take a look at it. There's a palpable personal anger going on with him that leaves this outspoken guy looking a little bit like the joke figure. Yes, a joke figure. And of course that brings us to the text that Nick read earlier this morning. Because Job and his friends are full of questions. Job 23 is a larger section of the Job book, where the suffering Job responds to his friends who are pressing him to repent of sins that they think he must have committed because that's causing his suffering. They see his misery and his loss as evidence that he has done something wrong. But Job maintains his innocence. He says, I haven't done anything wrong. But here he also laments the fact that there is no place that he can go to talk to God, that he cannot go and lay his case before God, because he thinks if he could lay his case before God, the verdict would be not guilty. And he says, oh, that I knew where I might find him. I would lay my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would learn what he would answer me. In other words, Job wants his hour with God and wants God to answer a question for him. And Job seems confident that if he could get that question asked of God and get the answer, that he would be acquitted. Now, if you read the whole book of Job, of course, you find that eventually God does respond to Job, but he never answers Job's question. The difference between responding to him and answering the questions. Isn't that how it is for many of the questions that we have for God? God simply is not going to answer them. Fry's unlikely to have any of his questions answered, and we're unlikely to have any of our questions answered. You know, just on Wednesday night, we were serving the meal at the Ronald McDonald House, and while we were there, I was thinking to myself, why do all of these small children have to go through all they have to go through? It just doesn't seem fair. The ones there are having heart surgery and brain surgery and chemotherapy. It doesn't seem right. But I got no answer. From 2003 to 2005, CBS had a TV series called Joan of Arcadia. Anybody remember that series? Just on a couple of years. In which the setup was that God spoke to a teenage girl, Joan. Initially, Joan thinks she can't be hearing from God, but eventually she learns to trust the voice and to follow God's instructions. Not without questions, of course. God doesn't answer those questions that she has, but she still has to follow what it is He says for her to do. While the series were running, Barbara Hall, who's the show's executive producer, explained, in trying to write God, I obviously don't know what God's thinking. On the show, God says God won't answer any direct questions because God chooses not to explain what is going on because that's God's mystery. The show really is about posing theological and philosophical questions and not answering them. That's how it is often for us too. We can pose all kinds of questions as we wait for God to answer them. Well, we might be waiting a lifetime. That leaves us with two possible conclusions. Either there are no answers, or someone higher than us knows the answer. Now, if the latter case is true, and I believe that it is, then we must proceed through life simply with faith in that someone. The poet Rainier Marie Rilke said, be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves. Like locked rooms and like books that are now written in every foreign tongue, do not seek the answers which cannot be given you, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live long some distant day into the answer. That's very poetic, but what does it mean to live into the questions? An unidentified author writing on Co-Intelligence Institute site tells of a dialogue between a group of people in the 1990s where there was an experience conversation consisting entirely of questions. In other words, you couldn't say anything except a question to one another. The participants could talk about any topic they want, but they couldn't be statements. They had to be questions. Kind of picture that in your mind, what that would be like. The author said she found the experience to actually be very transformative as people talked in questions. She said it's an exercise that several different questions arise, including statements masquerading as questions, rhetorical questions, open-ended questions, questions that simply direct attention, strategic questions, questions that modify, overlap, or focus on some portion of another question, or link the issues of a previous question to another area of inquiry, etc. She said powerful questions simultaneously open up and focus our attention. She goes on to say it's a great opportunity to explore what relationships we have to questions other than answering them. And that's important for our inquiry. Ultimately, said the author, questions can take us deep into the meaning of life. Nick can tell you that's pretty much true in counseling. And when I went back through my counseling training back in seminary days, and when I practiced it in individual counseling or group counseling, you ask questions. You don't give answers, right? That's something that we have to figure out on our own as you're providing that information. You don't go see me and Nick and we wave a wand over your head and everything's right. We just ask you questions that make you wrestle with your own existence. Sorry to have to tell you that after maybe having spent $85 an hour for a counselor to know that they're just going to answer you questions. It's very rabbinic. That's the tradition that Jesus had as well, which is probably why they teach us that way in seminary, because Jesus as a rabbi did the same thing. People would ask Jesus questions. He didn't give them answers. He answered with a question. Go back and read some of Jesus' quotes, and he's always answering with questions. These don't give you answers, but they make you dig deeper. So deep that even today, in 2015, we're still exploring those questions that Jesus asked 2,000 years ago. So they make you dig deeper. That is, we don't necessarily have to have the answer in order for questions to push us to the boundaries of our life. When we live questions in our conversations, we dialogue with people around us. When we live the questions of the way of life, we are in dialogue with life itself. She said in her writings, it's kind of like a living fruit tree that continually generates fruit for our nourishment. Any time that you see an apple grow on a tree, unless the tree is dying, the next year it's going to have another apple. More will follow. They don't answer why they're growing, they just nourish you. And they're full of seeds as well. So kind of put that into your question thing. Those questions nourish you, and those seeds are things that make you question and look deeper into what it might be. Now, while our denomination is not big into spirituality, there are churches that spend a lot of time on questioning. The early Methodists used to have class meetings where the converts who had just come to become Christians, they were met in small groups of 12 to 15, and a designated layperson would lead them. And the classes were not set up as classes or study groups. They were set up as accountability clusters. When they met weekly, they'd go around a circle, and the leader asking each one in turn to say something about their experience of living the Christian life and what went on. And each time they would tell their spiritual victories and failures, kind of what's going on since the last time they met. They would pray together, encourage one another, advise one another, and generally help each other by holding each other accountable. But it all began by them questioning their own personal progress. You can't tell about how God has affected you unless you question what has changed in your life. Many historians agree that this class setting was a major source of why the vitality of the early Methodists struck out. The Quakers do something very similar also. They call theirs queries. It's a series of questions for individuals and collective reflection and spiritual growth. Historically, they have met in groups and asked questions and then just sat and thought about it. There's sometimes you would go to a Quaker meeting and hardly any talking at all. People just kind of sit the whole time and think about scripture reading or a question that is asked. It's tedious maybe, but it also helps you recognize yourself and helps you be obedient as you go further and talk with one another and know that God is there with you while you're doing that. I mean, that might be the end game to all of this anyhow, is that we shouldn't expect answers from God. Not answers, but a dialogue about life and the experience of God's presence in our daily realm. I mean, things are going to happen to us. Things are going to happen in the world. We can question them, wonder why those children are suffering at the Riley Children's Hospital, why there are school shootings, why there are diseases. That doesn't make them go away. Let's question them. And we can have all our own opinions about all the different things that are going on. That doesn't really change them either. We know that in life, from the very beginning, life has been difficult, been full of toil and tribulation. People have suffered and died and been abandoned and abused. But we also know that during all of those experiences, God is still there with us and helping us dialogue through life. What can we do with the children who are ill at Riley Children's Hospital, the Ronald McDonald House? There's no point in asking God why it is. What we can do is do things to help fund and support physicians and researchers to find cures for those diseases. We can prepare meals so their family feels some comfort. We can hold their children and tell them we're thinking about them. But we can't really expect God just to give us an answer how this all works out. But we know that if we do what it is God's asked us to do, that God is there present for us. I'm aware that Stephen Fry may never experience a dialogue of the presence of God because I don't think actually he was a Christian. He's really not initiating that conversation of faith. And Job had a question for God and never got an answer. Yet, even amidst that, Job remained convinced that God was real, and evidently his questions that put him in front of this God helped him get through the trying times that Job experienced. It's very likely that whatever the questions are that roll around in your mind might not be the ones that I shared with you. There might be 100 other ones. But whatever those questions are, it's likely that you are not going to get an answer either. But you might be aware of the fact that God is real and present for you during those times of questioning. That is the good news for Job. That is the good news for the people who suffer in the world. That is the good news for me and you. That while we might not find answers for everything we ask, that as we go through this journey of life and through all the things that life brings to us, we know that God is with us regardless of what happens. Amen. This is the Word of God for the people of God.
Praise be to God.